Hi, I'm Krutika, and today's episode is with Bhavin. At 50 years young, Bhavin has a level of strength and fitness that many would be envious of. However, his journey to being in the best shape of his life wasn't an immediate transformation. Like most things, it was a labour of good habits repeated regularly. From changing his nutrition and daily activities, Bhavin now embodies a level of discipline that I have great admiration for. His fitness journey has enabled him to achieve incredible feats, including the Annapurna trek in Nepal's Annapurna mountain range, and earlier this year climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest peak. Talk about adrenaline and adventure. Now, we've all heard the saying, your body is a temple, but devoting a consistent level of respect, care, and nurture for the thing that journeys throughout life with you is a task that not everyone commits to. How do you view your body, and what are you doing to take care of it? Bhavin's journey has inspired me to want to push harder with my own health and fitness journey, and it may just do the same for you. Hello, Bhavin. So good to have you on my podcast. How are you today?
Very good, Kritika. How are you? It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Thank you for agreeing to say yes to be here. I've had a great, productive Sunday, one that I think you'll be quite proud of, considering it's only 1 o'clock at the moment. We've already done a 6.5K walk this morning, so I'm feeling a bit smug. What about you? What's your morning been like?
Classic. I did have a late start, but yeah, a session at the gym, some strength training, and I was supposed to go for a run, but I opted out of that and opted into a gym session instead. Yeah, so energy levels are good.
That's good. So you've got one up on me, a gym session, including strength training. Amazing. Now, I know you obviously from our mat work Pilates class that we do on a Monday evening. And that's going to be sort of the focus, I guess, for our conversation, fitness and sort of your hiking adventures. But before I come on to that, I tend to do a bit of a snoop of all my guests, usually stalking their Instagram. And I know it was your wifey Rupal's birthday on Friday.
It was indeed.
Did you treat your special lady on her special day?
We are actually, after this podcast, we are heading out to a high tea together because the work last week was crazy. So for both of us. So we're actually going out after this podcast. So looking forward to that as well.
Amazing. I hope the timing of this podcast didn't interfere with your plans.
Not at all.
Are you an afternoon tea kind of person or a high tea person?
I'm not. This is my first experience. It's going to be, especially being vegan and all of that. However, Rupal has been to a couple of these and she raves about them. So it's what she wanted to do. So it sounds good.
Afternoon tea feels like a feminine thing to do.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason I simply flagged that is because my husband actually enjoys afternoon tea with me, and his birthday falls around Christmas, so he actually quite likes doing afternoon tea around Christmas time because it's always festive. And last year we did Mothers of Mayfair for their high tea experience. Fantastic. Which I will absolutely recommend. And obviously this podcast isn't sponsored by them, but in case you ever decide to go for another one,
it's an option for sure.
It's an option, absolutely.
Thank you.
Right, so let's kick off then firstly with what your relationship with exercise and fitness was like when you were sort of growing up.
So growing up, gosh, that goes back a long way back. But growing up, I was born and brought up in Mombasa in Kenya. So growing up into my sort of late teens, if I kind of focus there, fitness and exercise regime was sort of not there. I think what I'd like to maybe call out is that life was good. There didn't seem to be a need for exercise or fitness. It doesn't mean that I was not doing any sports. I was involved in some sporting activities, but I think the reason for those was more to participate, meet with friends, be an excuse to get out of the house. But really speaking, fitness and exercise wasn't a focus. Thinking about it now and reflecting back to perhaps my thought processes at that time, I think within myself there was sort of lack of awareness or knowledge about fitness and exercise as such. So in my mind, I was active enough. I was active and therefore I was exercising and fitness was automatically included in my routines. However, I was a foodie as well. So being a foodie for me also meant that there was no limitations to what I would have. Of course, being vegetarian all my growing up life through the background of the family and everything like that. But being a foodie meant that there was access to lots and lots of options, mostly fried foods, as you can imagine, particularly things like nasto and chevras and all that. But also being in Mombasa, you are exposed to the mogo at Lighthouse and all this kind of stuff. So um, that was also a big part of my life.
And I can sort of relate because growing up in an Indian household, maybe it's a cultural thing, right? Like food is such an integral part of a lot of gatherings, dynamics of the family, I mean, just before this call, my dad rang me to sort of say, oh, you didn't reply to my morning message. And often he normally rings me also to say, hey, do you want some food? I'll send some food over to you. So it's food just feels like something that for Indian families, it's just such a big part, right?
Indeed, indeed, and you're right, because I think in our household it was also, and sometimes it feels like it still is the case, that there's always enough food at dinner for to sit down another 2 or 3 people with ease. Or although it's changing now, but what I feel that led to in during whilst growing up is actually we've got a little bit extra. Why don't you have it? And so I felt that I was consuming more than I really needed to, as such.
And I can relate to that as well. It's like sometimes when I go over to see my mum and dad, it'll be like, "Oh, just have this, like kaile, have
Yeah,
one extra, sort of thing." And it's like you don't realize that one extra rotli or that one extra teplu or that rasmalai, it all adds up, right? And so you kind of just eat it, and then you sort of realize later on that maybe that wasn't the best decision. And I don't know if you felt this, but growing up, for me, exercise was one of those things that I looked at for weight loss as opposed to strength and stamina. I've been of a certain frame, and so I wasn't always exercising because I saw it as I don't want to lose any more weight, right? And I know that's not everyone's story. And so I've had to, in my adult years, really try and unlearn that. And I only really got into my fitness in my 30s where I realized, hang on a minute, exercise is more about strength and stamina and feeling good about yourself. It's not just weight loss. What was that relationship like for you? I mean, you mentioned you did activities and you were playing sports, but you were also foodie. Was there a kind of shift in the way you looked at exercise?
that linkage in my mind, and this is, I think, personal to me, sort of didn't exist as such, right? So there was no, I don't recall that I ever had a thought process where I had to tell myself that I need to watch what I'm eating or how much I'm eating, and therefore relate that to the amount of exercise that I was getting into. I mean, just going back to the point where I did also used to ride a bike quite regularly as well. Now thinking about it, that was another form of exercise, but again, the two things were sort of not related. And that relationship came much later.
So, was there a specific moment or event that led you to kind of focus on that fitness journey a bit more for yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a great question. So it all started for me in my sort of late 30s, heading into my 40s. And for the audience, as we record this podcast, I am 50 this year. I turned 50 earlier this year.
I cannot believe that. Again, the audience can't see how you look, but like I say, I know you from my mat work Pilates class, Bhavin. And when I found that out, I was like, what? He's 50? Really?
Thank you. You're very kind. So I think there was a point where during the annual checkups with the doctors, there was a flag up of high blood pressure. We initially, the agreement with the GP was that, okay, we're going to try and amp up a little bit of exercise, but also reduce the amount of salt that was coming into the diet, which was another thing in the household. I felt that after learning about the amount of salt that needed to be used and how traditionally the cooking where had gone on. So, I had been consuming a fair amount of additional salts in the daily nutrition. But anyway, coming back to the blood pressure. So that the initial journey for about 6 months was okay. amp up your activity, see what you're eating, reduce the amount of salt and other things, and see how that goes. But that wasn't making much of a difference. So they sent me for various tests, etc. But I was also invited voluntarily to go and participate at a program that was being run at the Ealing Hospital. And they were targeting Asian families or Asian family members who were of South Asian origin and had, let's say, a waistline of more than 38 inches, to say, look, and you're fitting in a certain age group, and to say to them, look, you're now in a position where you need to make changes in your lifestyle, because otherwise you're heading for coronary diseases and various other issues. And that was, I think, a 7-week program, 8-week program, and I used to have to go once a week to the Ealing Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get taught, or you'd get shown off on things like, well, these are the types of exercises you need to do. By the way, can you do a food diary for 2 weeks? And I think the first alarm bells for me, in addition to the BP thing that was going on at the GP, went off when I did this 2-week food diary. But that 2-week food diary, and looking back at it after I'd written it, just said to me, okay, this is not right, and something needs to change. And typically Monday to Friday as a working day lunch typically would have been a Tesco meal deal or a supermarket meal deal, which involved a sandwich, a can of Coke or some fizzy drink, and a packet of crisp, right? And this was happening 5 days a week at least. And then I'd come home, and then depending on dinner or whatever is happening at the weekend, there'd be more fizzy drinks and things like that. So combination of the program and the BP thing that was going on, the doctors actually was seeing that there was not much change happening. But what they said is, okay, now you need to go on your blood pressure tabs. And by the way, these tabs are going to be for life. So when after that appointment I came home, something clicked later in the day in my head that this is a lifetime medication. And I paused. I think my brain just paused and looked around what was going on in the family as well, immediate family, many of whom were already on some sort of similar medication, whether it's high BP, cholesterol, whatever, and them also facing side effects of those medications, because they have various side effects. It could be impacts on your kidneys or whatever. And I'm like, in my mind, the clicking was adding up to the fact that actually I don't want to be on lifetime medications. Am I even going to make it to 50? So that click happened, and that's when in my mind I decided, okay, no, I need to start making changes.
I think there's not a lot of people that have, kind of that self-awareness to recognize when a switch needs to be made. And it does take a certain level of what can I do that's within my control to actually change what the future might look like for me. And if you don't mind, can I ask you what might seem like a slightly personal question? Please don't feel like you have to answer this, but at your heaviest, how heavy were you?
So I'm very embarrassed to say this, but I got to 129 kilos at my heaviest, and my waist was 44. So, when you go to the doctors, they have these charts that say, okay, if you're of this age and of this height, you need to be at this weight between this bracket. And I was clearly on the far scale of that, in the obese side of things. So that that sort of complemented the shift, the reasons for the shifts that I needed to make.
Are you okay to share what your weight and waistline is currently?
Yes, so I'm now in my weight, I'm just under 80 kilos, that's 79 and a half-ish, and my waistline is just under 36.
And how did it take you to adjust to that shift? Because, as someone who, and you mentioned it, you're a foodie, kind of making that switch to the different foods. You mentioned you were vegetarian earlier, but I know you're vegan now. Can you paint us a picture of what that transition looked like?
So there's several things, and for me this was a start of a journey, and I knew that I had to experiment with various things, and not everything that was out there or necessarily being pushed in my direction was going to work for me. So I needed to try out and for a period of time and see what works for me as an individual. And I think for your audience, it's really important to recognize that what I'm about to say may or may not work for them, but these are options that I tried out and I figured out that actually, no, this is making a difference for me. So one of the first things was focus on diet, in addition to complementing that with exercise, right? So there's a big statistic in my mind that says 60 to 70% of what we eat dictates on how our body is performing, and then there's exercise that complements how we want our body to perform as well. So I knew I had to focus on diet quite heavily. So one of the first things that I did was I needed to cut out bread out of my life. So I used to eat a lot of bread. I could easily have 4 toasts for breakfast.
Wow.
And of course, you can imagine that with a layer of butter on it. And of course, that would then follow with a lunch of a sandwich. And I could come home and easily have 3 or 4 chapatis or rotis, depending on what shak it was.
Yeah.
So I knew that that was one of the significant changes that needed to come. Portion control was another thing that really came in through the program at Ealing Hospital. I could easily have consumed 2 or 3 chapatis with a chunk of rice, let's just say. And I was told that I need to reduce my rice to maximum 6 tablespoons. And that can only be complemented with 1 chapati. And this is coming after my 2-week food diary. So those were some of the changes that I started implementing, and within weeks there was a noticeable difference on the scales. And then of course adding exercise to it, walking, regularly, but also starting a gym routine as well really started to help bring the weight down. I also had developed some lower back discomfort and pain when standing up to do basic things like ironing or trying to wash up at the sink. Although if you ask Rupal, I don't do any washing up nowadays.
I think all wives will say that about their husbands. I say that about mine.
But those pains and those investigations led to a finding that there was a slight bulging of one of the discs between 3 and 4 in the lower spine. And I went to 2 different consultants to talk about this, and whether the easy answer was, of course, surgery to gently push the disc back into place. But that bulging of that disc or popping out of the disc was pushing on a nerve right next to it, which was what was causing the pain. But the 2 consultants insisted that I was very young, that I should not even consider any kind of surgery at this point, and I should focus on exercising and stretching my body out a lot more. So I then found this thing called a personal trainer at the gym. And I said, look, this is the issue, and I need help to guide me with certain exercises that will help with this issue that's surfaced. And what that led to was, this is now going back about 6.5 years, but what that led to was the fact that I've now got an exercise routine that's not only helping me burn fat and calories, but it also was giving me enough mobility to stretch and pull my spine so that the disc would push back in its own, which it did within 12 months.
It's incredible. And I think that's the other thing that people don't realize, that the power of exercise also can support various different bodily structures that we might have in the back pain that you mentioned, especially, right? And the older we get, I mean, I sort of feel it, and I won't tell the audience how old I am at this point, but I am getting old. And just like simple things that I could do in my early 30s or 20s, it just feels that much more harder. Something I did want to touch on is, you mentioned you got a PT, and I noted that you started gymming. Did you find that process of going to the gym initially quite intimidating?
It was extremely tough. I was very self-aware of my physique.
Mm.
My body was not a body to be templed at the gym, so I would never ever venture into the weights area, to give you an example, because in the weights area in any gym, you've just got these idyllic bodies that are just pumping iron into their muscles. Getting into a gym routine itself was also quite tough. It took me a good part of 3 to 4 months to establish that the evenings or the afternoons or the lunch times don't work for me. I'm going to be an early morning person. I'm going to be there at 5:30 in the morning, and I've got to do an hour's worth of gym before my day starts. So that in itself was also tough. But yeah, getting into the gym and finding that drive to get what you needed to get, what I needed to get done was tough. And what really helped with that is setting some short-term goals and having a target to say, okay, in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, this is where I want to be, and this is the movement I want to be able to see. Given where I was starting from, I knew that I couldn't take big jumps. For example, I couldn't say from 129 kilos, I'm going to go down to 100 kilos. Losing 30 kilos in just over a month, that's going to be ridiculous. So I had to set myself small goals to say, okay, 2 kilos here, another 3 kilos here, whatever it was, and then sticking to that goal, and that goal had to be something that had to be in front of brain also during breakfast, dinner, and lunch, because it was, as I said earlier, the complementation of the exercises and the diet was a really really big thing for me in my case.
And so, can I just ask? Obviously, you mentioned the diet being such a big piece. Were you with Rupal at this point?
Yeah.
So, obviously, there's another person that is in the house that you're having meals with. The question that springs to my mind is, how did Rupal take this, and what was navigating that like? I can imagine she would have been supportive, but she's obviously maybe probably assuming that she's the chef in the household.
She's absolutely the chef. And it's a great question, Kritika. And then it was tough at the very beginning because I was coming in with my demands of, look, I want to not eat these things, or I need to reduce some of these things. But just touching back on that program at the Ealing Hospital, one part towards the end of that program, they actually invited Rupal with me to one of the sessions. And it was intended for all the people who are cooking in the household, right? Or doing majority of the cooking in the household. And what that session was really focused on was actually how much oil are you using, how much ghee are you using, and what are some of the alternates that you can consider, and what do you need to do. So I think that helped frame the picture of what the path for me if I was to continue in my old ways. And following that session, I mean, Rupal was really supportive, is supportive, and is continuing to be supportive even today. She has been incredibly innovative in the ways of actually also helping me to say, do you really need to eat that much, or do you need that extra bit? So it's helping me. She's not saying to me, don't eat that. She's asking me to think about it, which I think has been, in the early days, was really, really good to kind of keep me on my path. And it's not easy, because when I come in and I say I want to do this and I want to have that, and I almost throw a spanner in the works of what maybe her plans were to cook as a meal on the day, or whatever, it was incredibly tough. But she adopted, and then the navigation was really good. The added complexity also then came in after my parents moved into the UK through this time as well. Now that brings another dynamic into the whole kitchen cooking space. And naturally we are going to the office. Mom is more at home, so she tends to do more of the cooking. But the salt intake thing that I talked about before, and the portions and everything, was a significant shift even for my mom, who does the cooking. But it's not only that, but you go for dinners outside or people's houses, whether I go to my in-laws or to a restaurant or whatever, I really needed to be aware and mindful that, like you were saying earlier, people will keep on saying, no, please take some more, here's one more, here a fried batata vada, or here is this, and have some more bhajia. And the fact that I was trying to make a shift and almost felt like, am I imposing in other people's spaces, and how do I navigate this? And that led me to being vegan. So I said to myself one January, one veganuary, that I'm going to try this out. Because the other thing, actually, before I talk about going vegan, the other thing with me, Kritika, was that portion control was tough, right? I couldn't say, okay, is a plate of bhajia, but I'm going to only have three and no more. If there's going to be 7 or 10 there, they're going to be gone, right? And it's the same with biscuits, and it's the same with all these other things. So what I found was that I needed to make a change that almost eliminated some food types from my diet. Because I think for me, again, this is stressing to the audience here, this was for me that because I could not tell myself when I needed to stop. I needed to have a cutout almost. And that led me to trying out Veganuary one January. It will be 7 years, 8 years maybe, coming
Wow.
up to this January, when I said I'm going to try it for a month and see how it goes. And that was it. I did not look back. But then linking that back to the challenges, again,
Yeah.
I'm coming home and saying, by the way, not only am I having less portions, but now here is another diet called vegan, which adds to the dynamic in the kitchen,
Yeah.
which was incredibly tough. So there was a period of time where Rupal, my mom, etc., had to make two dishes of the same type because one with dairy, one without dairy. So today, if you look at my mom and her wanting to do her cooking, she'll be like, okay, we will make dhokra, but we will make only the vegan ones because they're actually better than the other ones. They are a lot more
Wow.
fluffier. So she is also starting to adjust to that fact. Part of my journey is also something that I'm hoping that has a bit of an impact on people immediately around me, whether that's Rupal, my kids, my mom, etc.
Mm.
We do need to live a healthy lifestyle, especially more so in today's world.
The point you were mentioning about your family having to adjust, and especially Indian families, like we use ghee and milk in a lot of dishes. And yes, there are foods that are just traditionally vegan, even in the Indian culture. But I think that shift for older generation as well takes a moment. They don't quite understand, like, why do you
Mm.
not want to eat this, Bhavin, I feel we could just probably talk about this aspect in your diet, but you have done some incredible things as part of your fitness and fitness journey. And one of the things that I know you do quite regularly is you go on these amazing hikes. One of the hikes that I know you did earlier this year was your climb on Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the highest peak in Africa. So can you tell us a little bit about what led you to that decision?
So about maybe 8 years ago, one of the things that started out in the Oshwal community was this thing called Oshwal trackers. And what they were doing was one Sunday, the last Sunday of every month in the year, they would get together in a location and walk about 8-10 miles. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. So signed up, went to quite a few of those sessions, really enjoyed the outdoors. Of course, you're meeting new people and all that kind of stuff, but was trying to really get into the outdoor walking and what we were now calling hiking at that point. And that for me was a bit of a start of getting into this. Became a regular member. Actually, I'm now one of the leads in the group who leads the monthly Oshwal treks. Once I became a regular, you network with people who have very similar interests in terms of outdoors and things. And through what we went through just as the COVID period, if I talk about that, actually that was a bit more of a booster in terms of the outdoors activity for me and myself, right? So I added a lot more walks into my day during the COVID period because whilst we were not allowed to go and meet with people, there was certain times we were allowed to be outdoors and adding a little bit of exercise to your routine, etc. So I added a lot more walking to my daily sort of lifestyle. But around this time, there was a group of us who were thinking of doing something in Nepal, whether it was Everest Base Camp or something different. And that started discussions. We actually formed a plan, but due to COVID, the plan was not successful. Anyway, post COVID, coming back to 2023, that's when we got together and we said, right, we talked about this, we were almost there. Who's interested? Let's do something. So 2023 I did with 14 other people the Annapurna circuit in Nepal. And
Wow.
then that was a 12-day sort of trek, but you do go on to high altitude points as well. So I'll come to Kilimanjaro, which was your question in a second.
Mhm.
So having done the Annapurna trek and going up to 5,416 meters as a highest altitude point and coming down from that. Now, having what you have heard so far, this is a new Bhavin that has been
Mhm.
identified. This is a new me that I'm learning that I've got new abilities or abilities that I can push a lot more. And that drove me to go on that challenge in Annapurna. Then coming back from that, the mountain calling has just been there with me. I think there's a saying out there that once you do one of these challenges, mountain, you're going to either come back with, I'm not going to do this ever again, or you're going to go and do something very similar again soon. After that experience, of course, you can't, certainly where I am in
Mm.
my life at the moment, I can't do this every year, but I did come back from there and I did have in my mind that I want to do something else as well. Kilimanjaro came up. I did that in June this year, and whilst it was not set out as a plan for this year already, it came as a last minute thing as I had made inquiries previously and there was a last minute dropout and I was at a point where I could get enough training to get in there. When that came up, I thought, okay, that's fantastic. It's in Tanzania. I was born and brought up in Kenya. Having seen Kilimanjaro, from those journeys going back and forth from Mombasa to Nairobi, and you always see the top of it, and with the snow, that was a distant memory that I held of it. And actually, now to go and climb this mountain in that geography was going to be something I really started to look forward to.
And so it was like there was almost the mountain calling to you. And I know you mentioned that once you'd done Annapurna, it was almost like you just got that buzz for it. What was it like preparing for Kilimanjaro? Because, I mean, to me, anyone that does a hike on a mountain that lasts more than a day, I'm always like, wow, how did you do it? Because it feels like one of those strenuous ones that require a lot of not just physical strength, but I imagine mental strength and resilience as well. So, can you tell us how you prepared for the hike?
So preparation training is key. So minimum 6 months of consistent training. I was walking every Sunday with the group or the regular groups that I hike with and extending those distances as time went on. So as you go into the 6 months, from about 3 months, you want to do longer and longer distance training. So you're extending your day or your mileage from starting from about 8 miles going all the way to about 18, 20 miles a day.
Wow.
And then towards the tail end, you want to do 2 or 3 consecutive weekends, so Saturday and Sunday with the long distances, because that's the conditions you're going to face on the mountain. You're not going to have, if you do Mount Kilimanjaro or any of these challenges, majority of them, the way they're set up is you're ascending pretty much. It's a 7 or 8 day program, and you're going to be ascending from day one, and you're not going to be in a situation where you're going to walk for one day, not walk for another day. There's going to be walking every single day. So you've got to have that 2 days, consecutive days training built in as well. But as part of that, you also want to start adding your backpack and the real weight that you're potentially going to be carrying on your day pack. It could be your lunch that you're carrying, of course, a water bladder, which has at least 2.5 liters of water for the day, and some snacks and your layers, right? Because when you're on the
Mm.
mountain, you're not going to be knowing when it's going to be windy, when it's going to be raining, and when the temperature could drop. So you're going to have to carry some of these layers with you. So you want to be able to walk with about 4.5 kilos on your back for those distances. And that's how you build your endurance for those
Mm.
expeditions. What I found, because we did that similar type of training for Annapurna as well, and what I found is if you have a really good training and you are consistent with it on the actual mountain, the actual walking and your stability, you don't have to think about too much because that is naturally built into your body. Our bodies are designed so phenomenally. This thing called muscle memory just kicks in And when you're climbing hills, and one of the things as part of the training is also you need to add some elevation, so you're going up and down hills regularly. So I remember there was one weekend in training for Kilimanjaro, I just went to what we have here as Ashridge Estate, and there's something there called Steps Hill, and I just went up and down Steps Hill about 7 or 8 times, just went up and down, up and down. And this is just to get used to the hills. Now, in reality, you might not have that kind of scenario, but at least you've trained and your body and your muscles are ready in case you're faced with conditions like that.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to ask you a question. Again, it might be a personal one, but you mentioned 6 months of training that you sort of need to consider before such a climb, and often to both the Saturday and the Sunday. Presumably, there were sacrifices you were having to make. I mean, how did you sort of navigate that?
That is tough as well, because suddenly again I put more demands on, actually this is a priority for me, and how does that work? So what that meant was a lot of the activity running around that happens typically over weekends with kids activities that fell onto Rupal, bless her, and she's been really supportive in that sense to kind of drive that. But it also meant that maybe I had to prioritize walking with probably missing some events. Now, in this period, it didn't happen, but depending on what was happening, I had to make those judgment calls to say, look, what am I going to do? And if there was a situation where I couldn't do one weekend, then I had to make sure that during the week I make up the mileage, whether it's evening walks or lunchtime walks or something like that. And so it's a bit of a balancing act, and I don't think I've missed any kids' activities, where they are performing and stuff due to this type of stuff. But if it has happened, it's on the odd occasion rather than the norm.
And I think that's the balance that can sometimes be difficult. It's great that you've been able to navigate that. Just a couple of quick questions that I want to sort of ask you. Now, obviously, you got into this during COVID times, right? And I feel like COVID was a time for many where it was like a catalyst for appreciating the great outdoors almost. Now, hiking something like Mount Kilimanjaro, my God, the views, the vistas would have just been incredible. Can you tell us what were like the most memorable moments you had hiking Kilimanjaro?
So it was epic, including Annapurna as well. But coming back to Kilimanjaro, it's the only mountain peak apart from Mount Meru, which is visible not as you start going up, but there are no other mountains around there. Unlike Nepal, where you go up one mountain and my God, there's just a plethora of mountains all around you, which is, the Himalayas. But going up and down Kilimanjaro, so you start out, the base layer is the rainforest. You start out in the rainforest. You're just covered in this canopy of green, luscious trees all around you. And there are these paths that you're walking through, even though it has not rained in real terms, but the rainforest means that it's constantly damp in there. So you just got to be careful around, not slipping, and be careful how you're walking and making sure you're using your equipment properly. But the rainforest was amazing. That's where we saw some wildlife as well. We saw some Columbus monkeys. And as you're going up the elevation over the next few days, you go out of the rainforest. So you literally break out of the rainforest into the moorland, and suddenly now the whole ecosystem around you changes. You've now got more shrubs, different kind of flowers that are coming through. What I found a bit odd and interesting was, these flowers that I was seeing, or we were seeing, you would see one or two of them hopping up here and there, and then you won't see any for another half a mile or something, and then you see them again. I'm thinking, why is this happening? And of course, Mount Kilimanjaro being a volcanic mountain as well, there was a lot of this wild flowers that were growing across. So the views start changing after sort of the fourth day. So by this time, you've gone through the rainforest, you've gone through the moorlands, and you're now starting to get on the upper land. You can see the mountain or different face of the mountain in front of you, and wow, it's coming closer and closer. It's getting bigger and bigger, and you're thinking, okay, look at the scale of that. But equally, the terrain changed as we went up quite significantly, because after sort of day 4, you are mostly in a terrain where there is hardly any shrubs. It's mostly rock, volcanic rock around you. There are no fixed paths, so you're making, you follow the guides and they're making the paths as you go along. Generally, there is a direction that you're going to go in this direction, but there are no sort of fixed paths, whereas in the rainforest, there was dedicated paths that you had to follow. There's a point in time after around day 5 where you have got to an altitude, you are acclimatizing, and at this point you are generally above cloud level. And at this point, the sunrises, the sunsets are just amazing. The night sky, which is just, if you think about all the stars, the galaxies, and millions of stars are visible because there is no light pollution and you can really see them, were just amazing. Of course, you can't spend too much time out there because it's getting bitterly cold, but those are some of the amazing views. And then, of course, as you go up, you can see where Mount Kilimanjaro is. You can see the two big cities around it, which is Moshi and Arusha. You can see them lit up at night as well. And you actually start appreciating how far you have already walked, and it's only been 5 or 6 days.
Thank you for sharing that, Bhavin. That just sounds like an absolutely incredible experience. I guess because you're sort of working to, was it 7 or 8 days you took on the hike altogether, right?
Yeah, 8 days,
so
yeah.
Was it a target for each day that you had to sort of try and meet? Okay, so you're nodding there. I guess my question
Yes.
is, you're seeing all these beautiful views and the surroundings. Did you find yourself taking a moment to pause to soak it all in?
We were going at a very good pace, and by good pace, I mean there was enough time to stop, to look around, to take pictures, to do funny poses around certain rocks with the group to do the poses. And, this group that I did Kilimanjaro with, most of the people were unknown to me. I had not walked with them, not met them before. Some of them came from the USA. So the way the group had gelled by then was really, really good. And I think that energy, that adds another level of energy into the dynamics of the day. But there was really, really enough time available to pause and appreciate. And one of the things that I've been previously told is, especially, and this has stuck in my mind since I did Annapurna, is don't just focus on looking ahead. Do pause and look behind and the views that you're leaving behind. And then I just remind myself of that every single time that I do one of these things, just to turn back and just look, because the views that you're leaving behind are equally amazing as well.
And what was it like sleeping out in the mountains?
So that was one of my tough parts for Kilimanjaro, because Annapurna was different because we had tea houses there. I fixed 4 walls, whether that didn't know that made any difference to the cold. But sleeping in a tent was the first time for me on this trip to Kilimanjaro. And so first couple of nights was a little bit tough. I didn't get as many hours, but then by the time you get to day 3, you're walking enough, the altitude is starting to gently kick in. You're tired, you have your food, and you just want to go to sleep. So it was, by day 7, I was comfortable, but
You'd
but getting
acclimatized to it.
yeah, exactly. But getting into a tent and having to do your sleeping bags and sort yourself out before the cold kind of kicks in, having your liners and everything set up was really a first time experience. I think reflecting on it now, I don't think I would have an issue doing it again. I'm having experienced it once, I think it was a fantastic experience to have done it on Kilimanjaro actually.
And again, just out of intrigue, the food, you mentioned you were carrying bits on your backpack, but what was the eating experience like? Because this is such a strenuous hike for your body. You need to get, I can only imagine, the right nutrients in so that you can continue to hike the next day and the next and the next. So what was the food like on this experience?
So I have to commend the teams that go up these mountains, right? Especially the porters, the chefs, and the guides that make this successful for you and comfortable for you, right? So their primary objective is to keep you safe and make sure that you are fed adequately to continue the journey, right? Because with Kilimanjaro, you are just ascending every single day until your summit day. But so the food, me being vegan as well, right? Imagine this. I had no issues on the mountain getting hot meals every day. Breakfast, you had type of porridge. We were spoiled with toast as well. And there was the option of peanut butter. Of course, you're having a carb-heavy diet because that's what you need on the mountain. And we were just spoiled. And these guys, they were carrying all the ingredients. They were carrying the water. They were carrying the gas tanks to heat up the food and make hot food for us. We were getting anything from pav bhaji. We were getting chapatis. They also made chips one of the days, right? Just to change the diet a little bit. They made pakora one day. So yeah, I think we were spoiled in the type of food, but I really have to stress and acknowledge that the guys work really, really hard to achieve this.
Yeah, and how incredible that up on a mountain and they're there frying chips and pakoras for you guys. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. Just in the interest of time, I guess, and I know you need to go to your high tea, and I feel like I could be here forever probing you about Kilimanjaro. You mentioned the summit. What was it like on that final push to the summit? And can you just paint us a picture of what it felt like? What were you feeling when you got to the top?
Summit day is a tough day. Most of the training you do is actually aimed to make your summit successful. The summit days are normally a very, very early start. So you normally tend to start middle of the night around midnight or 1 a.m. We started at 1:20 a.m. At this point, you wake up early, you pack your stuff for the day, you have your hot porridge because it's probably about minus 13, minus 14 degrees Celsius at this point. You are layered up. Actually, you slept with your layers, so you're just coming out and getting sort of fresh to get going. And you're starting in the dark. You've got your head torches on. You've got your thermals, your gloves, everything to make sure you're safe from the cold and the wind. And you start out. The key is to go up slowly. You can't rush up. You're already at over 4,500 meters above sea level. So air is starting to get thin, but you start pushing and you follow the guides. You keep the energy levels up. Sometimes you are not even able to hydrate because the bladders that you carry, the pipes may freeze because of the cold temperatures, but we were lucky enough that we were able to carry some sort of water that didn't freeze, and we were able to drink water. Keep yourself hydrated, keep the energy levels up as you're going up. Then you get to a point, the objectives typically on Kilimanjaro is you start at a time in the middle of the night so that you can summit at around sunrise or just after sunrise. But that generally depends on the pace of the overall group you're with and how you're climbing up, etc. And as I said, we don't want to rush to get there for sunrise. You go at your time, and if you get there a little bit later or a little bit earlier, it's okay. So as we were going up, on one end, the moon crescent started to come up. And you can imagine you're now at such a high altitude, the moon is sort of starting under you at the horizon and starting to come up. Those images are sort of forever tattooed in my head. And the moon is, starting with that beautiful orange color, and it's starting to come up and the color is changing. You start admiring that with the stars that are now starting to disappear. You continue up, and a little while later, around 6:30, 7 a.m., quarter to 7, the the early sun rays start to break, and the clouds formation that you can see how it's formed around the mountain, because you don't know, as you're walking in the dark, you don't necessarily know what's ahead of you. What climate are you going to face when you're up there? Is it cloudy? Because Kilimanjaro is known to sometimes also be sitting under cloud for a good part of days. So so you start seeing all of that, and as soon as the sun comes up, the energy level changes because you're now, okay, this is good. But then the reality dawns on you, because now you're able to see that your target is way up there, and you've got all this elevation to still climb up. Up to this time in the dark, you just head down or head forward, and you're following the path step by step by step, and you're navigating the paths and following the guides. But now suddenly it dawns on you, wow, the point is up there. But yeah, summit day is a tough day. And with Kilimanjaro, there's two sort of summit points. One is called Stella Point and the other is called Uhuru. Stella is about 125 meters less than Uhuru, and Uhuru is the highest point of the mountain, and that is the top of Africa, 5,970 something meters. When you get to Stella, you think you've made it, you get your booster, but then you realize that actually you still got to go to Uhuru, which is 1.1 kilometers from Stella, and you can actually see it from Stella that Uhuru is up there. That 1.1 kilometer, Kritika, took us 50 minutes to navigate, 50 minutes,
Wow.
because there was snow. You're now at close to 6,000 meters. The air is thin. Your body is already sort of exhausted from the climb. Although the elevation is not that great, but you're navigating all this different terrain with the snow as well, which was the case for us earlier in June this year. But once you're at Stella, you know that you've made it. You've got a lot of energy coming. You're looking around at the views. You can see the glacier on one side. And we were so lucky, I think, in our climb, because whilst there was all this snow sitting there, the guides were repeatedly telling us that for 2 years they haven't had this much snow. So we
Wow.
were amazed that there was so much snow. There was a section where we had to walk through about a foot of snow, but luckily we had crampons and the right equipment to take us through. And then in our group there was 8 people, but because majority of people were exhausted after getting to Stella, the guides instructed them, they gave them the
Mm.
guidance to make their way down, because once you make it up, that's only half of your journey. You've got to make
Come back
yourself
down,
ready
of
to come back
course.
down, and coming down is actually a lot more harder than it is going up. So it's going to take a lot more energy. And if those people, what look, I don't know if they would have made it to Huru or not, but if they had made it to Huru, they would have taken a lot longer and a lot more energy to get down to camp from the summit. So out of 8 of us, only 3 of us actually made it to Uhuru, which was just amazing. Now you're at the top of Africa, and I mean, there are no words to describe the feelings, but you get a level of exhilaration, energy, successful, climb, no injuries, and I was really pleased that actually all of the group made it to Stella, because, everybody comes with different abilities, and as a group, we were really, really successful in that sense. And then the climb down is a tough one from Kilimanjaro. You're almost got these rubble piles that you're going through, and you're not walking down, you're almost sliding down. So you take 2 or 3 steps, and then you're sliding, 2 or 3 steps, and then you're sliding. I think I found that probably the toughest. And on my way down, I was saying to the guide that I'm going to need about 45 minutes worth of sleep, because I'm going to be exhausted coming down, because it was such a long, long night. But look, these are the types of things, I learned a lot in these climbs. There's a lot of time where you are reflecting on oneself. There is no way Kritika in the old Bhavin could have done Annapurna or this.
Mm.
And I'm really chuffed that I was able to do Kilimanjaro earlier this year.
Can I just say massive congratulations to, to achieve what you just described there. And I can only imagine that feeling of, exhilaration, as you sort of put it, and elation maybe in some respects that you got to the top, but I know you've got to come back down. And actually I've not done crazy hikes like you've described here. I've done Mount Batur, which is in Bali, and that's only a, sort of a day hike. And I totally relate to that point of coming back down being that much more challenging. So well done for putting your body and mind through that and achieving it. I'm
Thank you very
sure
much.
it's going to be a memory that's going to remain with you forever. I mean, you mentioned a couple of tips earlier. I guess just before we end with our final question, one before that, for anyone listening that wants to consider a hike like Annapurna or Kilimanjaro, what's the top tip you would give them?
The biggest thing I would suggest is, if you are not a regular walker or hiker, don't underestimate the training, number one. Number two, be prepared for all kinds of weather conditions, because you don't know what it's going to be like up there. Talking back about Kilimanjaro, we didn't know how much snow there was going to be up there, but luckily we were prepared with crampons to be able to navigate that with a little bit of ease. Otherwise, we'd be slipping all over the place, which might have made it impossible to get to Huru. One more thing I would say is, and you touched on it a little while ago, this is also a lot about the mind as it is about your body. So keeping your mind in a positive frame and continuously assessing yourself to say, am I good? Am I good to continue? Keeping that at the fore is really, really important, and being honest and open about that with yourself and with your guides is really critical on the mountains.
I know I said this would be our sort of final question before the last. I think I lied because I have one more, Bhavin, that I want to ask you, because you just mentioned the mind. And again, slightly personal, so feel free to bat it away. But what did you learn about yourself on that hike?
So for me, Kilimanjaro was yet another endorsement that I'm doing the right things for myself. I am discovering more of me, and I am okay to continue pushing my own limits a little bit. Was I think one some of the biggest things that I came back with. Of course, on these things you do sometimes spend time in solitation, right? So you do a little bit of self-reflection as well, actually a lot of self-reflection. And, Kritika, I think these things are helping me longer term in not only having a positive impact in my personal life, but also my professional life as well.
Amazing. Really well said. And now my final question to all my guests is always, what journey are you on next?
Wow, I think we should have another one of these sessions maybe in a few years' time, because I think...
I'll hold you to that, Bhavin. If you do suggest it, I will hold you to it.
Please do, because I think I'm on a journey of self-discovering. As I just said, I think I want to continue doing what I'm doing because it's really working for me. I want to try and make, if this conversation and others like this help other people to make positives in their lives, that would be a blessing for me. So the more I can share, the better it is. I think I've said to you separately that I've now come to terms with my old sort of lifestyle versus my new lifestyles, and I'm comfortable opening up about it. This is a first step in doing that, and if I can make a small difference in other people's lives, I'll be really happy with that. But overall, my journey is a journey of discovery. I don't know where I'm going next, but whatever comes, I really want to be open to accepting and exploring more.
Thank you so much. And I love that, and I think we should always be in a journey of discovery of our own selves because we're constantly evolving. So thank you so much, Bhavin. I've personally really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really hope your audience enjoys it.
I'm sure they will. Thank you for listening to this episode of Journeys with Krutika. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and share. I'd love for you to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a journey that you want to share, email me at journeyswithkritika@gmail.com or reach out via my socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Just search Journeys with Krutika because your journey is extraordinary.